A trip with his assistant made the millionaire realize his jealousy by the pool. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. Ethan Cole had built his life on control. 38 years old, self-made, worth more money than he ever talked about. Ethan believed discipline was the reason nothing ever slipped through his fingers. His calendar was flawless, his decisions immediate, his emotions carefully filed away where they could not interfere. And for 3 years, Lena Moore fit perfectly into that system. She was his executive assistant, the quiet presence who arrived before him and left after him. The one who knew his coffee order, his flight numbers, and the precise moment to interrupt a meeting without being asked. To Ethan, Lena was efficiency in human form, dependable, neutral, replaceable if necessary, or so he told himself. The trip was supposed to be routine. 5 days at a private coastal resort in Southern California, investor meetings by day, paperwork by night. Ethan booked it the way he booked everything. His oceanfront suite secured without question. Lena's standard room confirmed without a second thought. It never occurred to him to ask how she felt about it. On the drive down, Lena reviewed schedules while the highway unspooled ahead of them, sun glinting off the windshield. Ethan listened with half an ear, already planning tomorrow's negotiations, unaware that something small was shifting just beyond his awareness. The moment it happened was unremarkable on the surface. After check-in, Ethan headed to a conference room, while Lena was told to wait nearby in case documents were needed. The resort's infinity pool stretched toward the horizon, water meeting sky in a seamless line. Ethan glanced out through the glass as he walked past and saw her there, shoes kicked off, sitting at the pool's edge with her feet in the water. She was smiling. Not the polite office smile he knew, but something softer, unguarded. A man stood near her, laughing, quietly as he spoke. Ethan slowed without realizing it. He told himself it was nothing, that assistants were allowed conversations, allowed breaks, allowed lives. Yet his chest tightened in a way he did not recognize. He watched Lena tilt her head as she listened, sunlight catching in her hair, and for the first time, a thought crossed his mind that unsettled him deeply. He did not know who she was when she was not working for him. And standing there, invisible by the pool, Ethan Cole felt something dangerously unfamiliar begin to stir. It was not anger, not desire, but a quiet fracture in the image he had of himself. For the first time, control felt like a thin suit that no longer fit. He turned away from the glass, forcing his steps forward, telling himself the meeting mattered more, that this moment would pass. Yet every few minutes, his thoughts drifted back to the pool, to the soundless laughter he imagined, to the realization that Lena existed in a world that did not revolve around his needs. That night, as the ocean murmured outside his suite and the lights of the resort dimmed, Ethan lay awake longer than he admitted to himself. Somewhere below, music played softly, voices carried on the breeze, and he wondered, without permission, where Lena was and who she was becoming when he was not there. And in that unanswered wondering, the first thread of jealousy wrapped quietly around his heart, unnoticed but impossible to undo. Without knowing it yet, Ethan had already crossed a line that would change everything between them. The trip had only just begun, and so had the quiet damage inside him waiting to surface by pool. By the second morning, Ethan told himself the feeling from the night before was nothing more than jet lag and an unfamiliar environment. He woke early, showered, and dressed with the same precision he always had, his tailored suit pressed, his watch fastened to the exact notch he preferred. Control returned easily when he followed routine, and routine was something he trusted. Downstairs, the resort was quiet, sunlight stretching across the marble floors, the smell of salt and coffee lingering in the air. Lena was already seated at a small table near the windows, her laptop open, documents neatly stacked beside her. She looked up when she saw him, offering the same polite smile. She always did. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice calm, professional, unchanged. He nodded, replying with a brief good morning of his own, relieved by the familiarity. For a moment, he almost forgot the pool, the laughter, the stranger. The meetings began mid-morning, stretching hour after hour, numbers exchanged, projections debated, hands shaken across polished tables. Ethan performed flawlessly, his mind sharp, his tone decisive. Lena sat just behind him, passing documents at the right moments, whispering reminders when needed. She was efficient, indispensable, exactly as she had always been. And yet, each time Ethan glanced back, something felt subtly off. She was present, but her eyes seemed brighter, her posture looser, as if part of her was still somewhere else. During a short break, Ethan noticed her phone light up. She glanced at the screen, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then silenced it and slipped it back into her bag. The gesture was small, almost meaningless, but it caught his attention in a way that surprised him. He realized then how little he knew about her life outside the office. He had never asked if she lived alone, if she dated, if she had dreams beyond managing his schedule. It had never seemed relevant. After lunch, the final meeting wrapped earlier than expected. Ethan dismissed the others and turned to Lena, telling her she could take the rest of the afternoon off unless something urgent came up. She blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. He watched her walk away, heels clicking softly against the floor, and felt an unexpected urge to follow, an impulse he quickly dismissed. He returned to his suite, intending to review emails, but his focus drifted. The ocean outside his balcony shimmered under the sun, and below, the pool area had filled with guests. Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped outside, resting his hands on the railing as he scanned the scene. It did not take long to find her. Lena stood near the edge of the pool again, this time wearing a light sundress, her hair loose around her shoulders. The man from the day before was there too, leaning casually against a lounge chair as he spoke to her. Ethan felt the same tightening in his chest, sharper now, more insistent. He tried to rationalize it. She was off duty. She was allowed company. None of it concerned him. Yet he remained where he was, watching as Lena laughed softly at something the man said, her body language open, relaxed. The sight stirred a discomfort he could no longer ignore. It was not anger, but a sense of exclusion, as if he were observing a version of Lena that existed entirely beyond his reach. That evening, during a formal dinner with investors, Ethan found himself distracted, his gaze drifting toward the entrance each time someone arrived. When Lena finally appeared, seated across the room, speaking with the same man by her side, the realization struck him with unsettling clarity. For the first time since building his empire, Ethan Cole was not the center of someone's attention, and the absence unsettled him more than any financial risk ever had. As the night wore on, music played softly and glasses clinked, but Ethan barely tasted his drink. His thoughts returned again and again to the pool, to the easy smile on Lena's face, to the growing awareness that something essential was slipping quietly out of his control. And somewhere beneath his composed exterior, the unease deepened, promising that whatever this feeling was, it would not fade as easily as he hoped. The third day of the trip began with tension Ethan could no longer dismiss. He noticed at the moment he opened his eyes, a dull pressure in his chest that had nothing to do with the early hour or the long meetings ahead. He dressed slower than usual, pausing in front of the mirror as if expecting his reflection to explain what was wrong. Nothing had changed on the surface. He was still Ethan Cole, still the man people listened to, still the one who decided outcomes with a sentence. Yet beneath that certainty, something felt unsettled. At breakfast, Lena joined him with her tablet in hand, updating him on the day's agenda. Her tone was steady, her posture professional, but there was a lightness about her he had not seen before this trip. She spoke of schedules and confirmations, but her eyes flicked toward the windows more than once, where the ocean stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Ethan caught himself watching her instead of listening, noting the way her hair caught the morning light, the faint smile that appeared when she thought he was not looking. When she finished, she asked if he needed anything else. He shook his head, then added, almost without thinking, "You seem to like it here." The word surprised them both. Lena paused, then gave a small nod. "It is peaceful," she said, "different from the office." There was no accusation in her voice, only truth, and it left Ethan strangely exposed. The morning meetings passed in a blur. Ethan spoke when required, but his attention drifted, his mind replaying moments he could not quite place. At one point, he noticed Julian Hayes seated at the far end of the room, listening intently, his expression relaxed, confident. Ethan had worked with many men like him, capable, charming, comfortable in any setting. He told himself there was no reason to feel threatened. And yet, when the meeting ended and Julian approached Lena with an easy familiarity, Ethan felt that quiet pressure tighten again. Julian thanked Lena for her help with some documents from the night before, praising her attention to detail. She smiled, accepting the compliment with grace. Ethan stood nearby, unacknowledged, a rare position for him. The realization unsettled him more than he expected. That afternoon, the heat drove most guests toward the pool or the beach. Ethan retreated to his suite, intending to work, but the silence pressed in. He found himself restless, pacing, checking his phone for messages that did not come. Eventually, he gave in and went downstairs, telling himself he needed air. The pool was lively, sunlight dancing across the water, laughter rising and falling with the breeze. Lena was there again, seated at the edge, her feet trailing in the water. Julian stood beside her, offering her a drink. Ethan stopped several feet away, unseen, watching as Lena accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact was insignificant, but it struck him like a blow. In that moment, something crystallized with painful clarity. He had always assumed Lena would be there when he needed her, available, reliable, unchanged. Watching her now, engaged and alive in a way he had never invited, he understood how fragile that assumption was. He stepped closer, his presence finally registering. Lena looked up, surprise flickering across her face before she composed herself. "Ethan," she said. Julian greeted him politely, introducing himself as if they were equals. The interaction was cordial, professional, but beneath it ran an undercurrent Ethan could no longer ignore. He felt out of place, like a guest intruding on a moment that did not belong to him. After a few minutes, he excused himself, retreating before his composure cracked. Back in his suite, Ethan poured himself a drink he barely touched. He stood at the window, watching the sun dip lower, casting long shadows across the water. For the first time, he admitted what he had been resisting. This was not about work or propriety. It was about fear. Fear that Lena was no longer contained within the boundaries he had drawn. Fear that he had mistaken her silence for permanence. And as the sky darkened and the lights around the pool flickered on, Ethan realized the distance between them was growing, and he had no idea how to stop it. The fourth day shifted everything, though no one announced it out loud. It began quietly, with the heat settling heavier over the resort and the schedule thinning to a single afternoon meeting. Ethan spent the morning restless, reviewing documents he already knew by heart, his attention fractured in ways he refused to acknowledge. Lena moved in and out of the suite with practiced ease, answering calls, confirming times, efficient as always. Yet Ethan noticed the smallest deviations. She hummed softly while organizing papers. She paused at the window longer than necessary. She seemed lighter, less contained, and the change unsettled him more than any disagreement ever had. By noon, the meeting was postponed until the next day. Ethan dismissed Lena, telling her she could take the afternoon for herself. The words felt strange in his mouth, like a test he had not prepared for. She thanked him, hesitation flickering across her face before she nodded and left. Alone, Ethan tried to focus on work, but the silence pressed in. He told himself to rest, to enjoy the luxury he had paid for, but the thought rang hollow. Eventually, he found himself heading downstairs, drawn by an impulse he did not name. The pool shimmered under the afternoon sun, guests scattered across lounge chairs, the air filled with soft music and low conversation. Ethan spotted Lena almost immediately. She stood near the shallow end, her sundress brushing her knees, sunlight warming her skin. Julian was there too, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, talking animatedly as he gestured toward the ocean. Ethan stopped short, unseen, watching as Lena listened, her expression open, engaged. Genuine sound that seemed to carry farther than it should have. Ethan felt it then, sharp and undeniable, a surge of awareness that left him breathless. This was not a passing distraction. This was the moment he realized he was watching something begin without him. Julian offered Lena his hand, inviting her into the water. She hesitated, glancing around as if suddenly aware of herself, then accepted. Their fingers met, and Julian steadied her as she stepped down, the water rippling around her calves. Ethan's chest tightened. He told himself to turn away, to respect boundaries he had never needed to consider before. Instead, he stepped closer. Lena noticed him then. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. "Ethan," she said, surprise softening her tone. Julian turned, greeting Ethan with easy confidence, introducing himself again as if this were their first real meeting. Ethan nodded, forcing politeness, acutely aware of how out of place he felt standing there fully dressed, removed from the easy intimacy of the moment. He asked Lena if she needed anything, the words sounding like an order even to his own ears. She shook her head. "Not right now," she replied calmly. The answer landed harder than he expected. For 3 years, Lena had responded instantly to his needs. Now, she stood waist deep in the pool, water glinting around her, choosing herself over him without apology. The silence stretched. Julian excused himself to get towels, leaving Ethan and Lena alone for a brief, charged moment. Ethan searched her face for something familiar, but found only a quiet resolve he did not recognize. "You seem comfortable," he said, the observation edged with something he could not hide. Lena met his gaze steadily. "I am," she answered. The honesty in her voice stripped away any pretense. Before he could respond, Julian returned, handing Lena a towel and smiling at her as if Ethan were not there at all. Ethan felt a flush of something close to humiliation. He muttered an excuse and stepped away, retreating before the tightness in his chest betrayed him further. Back in his suite, Ethan stood still, hands braced on the desk, his reflection staring back at him with unsettling clarity. For the first time, he admitted what he had been denying. He was not losing control of a situation. He was confronting the possibility of losing Lena, not as an assistant, but as a presence he had taken for granted. And that realization, quiet and irreversible, marked the true beginning of everything he feared was about to unravel. By the 5th day, the tension between Ethan and Lena had settled into something heavier, no longer sharp but persistent, like pressure beneath the skin. The resort woke slowly that morning, mist lifting from the ocean, sunlight filtering through pale clouds. Ethan stood on his balcony longer than usual, watching the pool area below remain empty, replaying the previous afternoon in his mind. Lena's calm refusal, her ease beside Julian, the way she had not chased after him when he walked away. None of it fit the order Ethan depended on. When Lena arrived to review the final details for the day's events, she was composed, professional, as if nothing had shifted. She spoke of schedules and transportation, her voice steady, her gaze focused on her tablet. Ethan listened, but his attention snagged on the distance between them. There was no warmth, no hesitation, no unspoken understanding. She was doing her job, nothing more. The realization stung. That afternoon, the resort prepared for an evening gathering by the pool, a casual networking event meant to close the trip on a relaxed note. Ethan had attended dozens like it before, but this one unsettled him. As the sun dipped low and lights flickered on, guests gathered with drinks in hand, laughter carrying across the water. Ethan arrived late, scanning the crowd before he could stop himself. He found Lena near the far end, standing with Julian, their heads bent close as they spoke. Julian handed her a drink, and she accepted it with an easy smile. Ethan felt the familiar tightening return, sharper now because he recognized it for what it was. This was jealousy, quiet but consuming. He moved toward them, interrupting their conversation under the guise of necessity. Lena turned to him, polite but reserved. Ethan asked her about a document he did not actually need, his voice clipped. Julian watched the exchange with mild curiosity, then excused himself gracefully, leaving them alone. The space between Ethan and Lena felt charged. "You seem busy tonight," Ethan said, the words escaping before he could temper them. Lena met his gaze, unflinching. "I am enjoying myself," she replied evenly. The honesty unsettled him. For a moment, he considered retreating, but something in him resisted. He gestured toward the pool, the glow of lights reflecting across the water. "I need you nearby," he said, the statement edged with authority. Lena's expression shifted, not angry, but firm. "I am off duty, Ethan," she said quietly. The words landed with more force than any confrontation could have. Around them, The party continued, unaware of the fracture forming in the space between them. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. For the first time, he heard how his words sounded, how they reduced her to function rather than choice. He lowered his voice. "This trip is important," he said. "So am I," Lena replied. The simplicity of her answer stripped away his defenses. Before he could say more, Julian reappeared, inviting Lena to join him by the pool's edge. She hesitated only briefly before nodding and stepping away from Ethan without another glance. Ethan stood there, alone amid the crowd, the realization settling heavily in his chest. He had miscalculated. He had assumed his presence would always outweigh anyone else's. Watching Lena walk away, he felt the first true pang of loss, sharp and undeniable. Later that night, long after the guests had dispersed and the pool lay quiet under the stars, Ethan found himself back on his balcony. The lights below shimmered faintly, reflections dancing across the water. He thought of the countless times Lena had anticipated his needs without being asked, how he had never questioned her loyalty because it had always been there. Now, faced with the possibility of her choosing something else, someone else, he felt exposed in a way wealth and power could not shield. For the first time, Ethan did not know how to fix what was breaking. And as he stood there listening to the distant ocean, he understood that the line he had crossed could not be uncrossed. Whatever came next would force him to confront not just his feelings for Lena, but the version of himself he had relied on for far too long. The moment lingered long after Lena walked away, settling into Ethan's chest with a weight he could not shake. That night, he barely slept. The ceiling fan hummed softly above him, the ocean breathing somewhere beyond the glass. But his thoughts circled one point with relentless clarity. For the first time, Lena had not moved toward him when he called. She had chosen herself, calmly and without drama, and the simplicity of that choice had undone him. Morning came quietly. The final full day of the trip arrived with pale lights spilling across the resort grounds, guests moving slowly as if savoring the last hours before departure. Ethan rose early, dressing without his usual certainty, his reflection in the mirror looking unfamiliar. Downstairs, he found Lena reviewing departure logistics at a small table near the lobby. She greeted him politely, her tone respectful, professional, unchanged. That steadiness hurt more than anger would have. He watched her fingers move across the screen, efficient and precise, as if the previous night had not altered the ground beneath them. During a brief pause, Ethan spoke before he could reconsider. "I would like you to join me for a walk later," he said. Not as an order, but it sounded close enough. Lena looked up, studying him for a moment. "After my tasks are complete," she replied. The conditional stung. They walked in silence toward the ocean path, the resort fading behind them as waves rolled in steadily, indifferent to their tension. For a while, neither spoke. Ethan felt exposed in the quiet, stripped of the authority he usually wielded so easily. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. "Last night," he began, then hesitated. Words had always been tools for him, carefully chosen, effective. Now they felt clumsy. Lena waited, her expression open but guarded. "I realized something," Ethan continued slowly. "I have been assuming things about you that were never fair." Lena's gaze did not waver. "Assuming what, exactly?" she asked. "That you would always be there," he admitted. "That your time, your attention, belonged to me by default." Saying it aloud felt like stepping into cold water, shocking but clarifying. Lena exhaled softly, looking out at the ocean before meeting his eyes again. "I have always done my job," she said. "But I am more than my job." The truth of her words landed cleanly, without accusation. Ethan nodded, shame threading through him. "I see that now," he said. "Or at least, I am starting to." The admission felt like a fracture, a break from the version of himself he had relied on for years. Lena studied him, searching for something beneath the words. "You did not notice until you thought you might lose me," she said quietly. The observation cut deep because it was accurate. Ethan did not deny it. "I was wrong," he replied. The silence that followed was heavy, but different from before. It was not charged with misunderstanding, but with possibility and risk. Lena did not move closer. She did not soften. Instead, she said, "I need space to decide what I want next." Ethan felt the instinct to negotiate, to fix, to control, but he resisted. "I will respect that," he said, and meant it, even though the uncertainty terrified him. They returned to the resort separately. The afternoon passed in a blur of final arrangements and polite exchanges. That evening, as the sun sank and the pool lights flickered on once more, Ethan stood at a distance, watching Lena from across the water. She spoke with Julian briefly, then excused herself, walking alone toward the far edge of the pool. Ethan did not follow. He stayed where he was, hands clasped loosely at his sides, allowing the distance she asked for to exist. In that restraint, he felt the true turning point settle in. He could no longer pretend his feelings were a temporary disruption, nor could he return to the comfort of assumption. Whatever lay ahead would require him to change, not to claim, but to wait. And as Lena stood by the water, staring out at the darkening horizon, Ethan understood that the most difficult part of desire was not wanting, but learning how to let go of control long enough to be chosen. The seventh part unfolded with consequences Ethan had not anticipated, the kind that arrived quietly, but carried lasting weight. The final morning at the resort began with luggage carts lining the driveway and guests checking out under a pale sky. Ethan reviewed the departure schedule alone in his suite, noticing the absence of the familiar rhythm Lena usually brought to these moments. She arrived on time, efficient as always, but something in her demeanor had shifted. She moved with a careful distance now, completing tasks without lingering, her replies concise, her presence restrained. It was professionalism sharpened by resolve, and Ethan felt the loss of their former ease with painful clarity. As they prepared to leave for the airport later that afternoon, Ethan received a call that disrupted the fragile balance he was trying to maintain. A board member needed immediate clarification on a decision Ethan had made. During the trip, one that required Lena's input. Instinctively, he called her name, expecting the familiar response. She looked up, attentive but reserved. He explained the situation, his tone slipping unconsciously into command. "I need you to stay close today," he said, the words echoing with an authority he had promised himself to abandon. Lena's expression hardened, not with anger, but with disappointment. "I told you I needed space," she said quietly. Ethan felt the misstep the moment it left his mouth, but the damage was done. "I am not trying to control you," he replied, though even to his own ears the claim sounded thin. Lena closed her tablet, meeting his gaze fully. "You may not be trying," she said, "but you are still doing it." The truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Later that day, while Ethan handled calls and logistics, Lena finalized arrangements independently. Julian stopped by briefly to say goodbye, thanking Lena for her help and wishing her well. Their exchange was polite, warm, unburdened by tension. Ethan observed from a distance, noting how easily Lena seemed to breathe in those moments, how her shoulders relaxed in a way they never quite did around him anymore. The contrast was stark, and it forced him to confront an uncomfortable reality. His presence, once neutral, had become a source of strain. The drive to the airport passed in silence. Ethan watched the landscape blur past the window, rehearsing words he could not find the courage to speak. He wanted to explain himself, to promise change, but he sensed that promises alone would not repair what he had fractured. At the terminal, Lena checked their luggage, handling the process with practiced efficiency. When it was time to part ways before boarding, she paused, facing him with composed finality. "I will be taking some time off after this trip," she said. Ethan felt the words like a blow. "Time off," he repeated quietly. "I need to think about what comes next," she continued. "About who I want to work for, and who I want to be." The implication was clear, and it left him momentarily speechless. "I respect that," he managed. Lena nodded, accepting the response without relief or satisfaction. She turned to leave, then stopped. "I hope you learn from this, Ethan," she said softly. "Not for me, but for yourself." With that, she walked away, disappearing into the flow of travelers. Ethan stood still long after she was gone, the weight of her departure settling slowly. On the flight home, he stared out the window, the clouds stretching endlessly below. For the first time in years, he felt uncertain about the future he had built so carefully. The realization was both frightening and clarifying. He had pushed too far, too fast, revealing that beneath his attempts at growth, old patterns still ruled him. As the plane descended and the city came into view, Ethan understood that the next phase would not be about reclaiming control, but about confronting the parts of himself that had driven Lena away. And in that unresolved tension, with Lena's absence echoing louder than any argument, the story moved toward a reckoning that neither of them could yet escape. Part 8 began not with confrontation, but with silence, the kind that stretched long enough to force reflection. Weeks passed after the trip, and Ethan returned to his life in the city with an unfamiliar weight pressing against his routine. His office remained immaculate, his calendar full, yet the absence of Lena was felt in every detail. Meetings started a minute later than usual. Emails waited longer for replies. Small inefficiencies surfaced, ones he had never noticed before because she had quietly absorbed them all. At first, Ethan told himself it was temporary, that assistants could be replaced, systems adjusted. He interviewed candidates, reviewed resumes, listened to polished answers, but each time, he felt the same hollow certainty. None of them were her. The realization unsettled him more than any loss of capital ever had. Late one evening, long after the office lights dimmed, Ethan sat alone at his desk, the city glowing beyond the windows. He replayed the moments he wished he had handled differently, the times he had mistaken presence for permission. For the first time, he did not rush to correct the discomfort. He allowed it to sit with him, to teach him something about the cost of control. Across the city, Lena had carved out a quiet life of her own. She took long walks in the mornings, revisited interests she had postponed, and considered offers she had never allowed herself to entertain before. The space she had claimed felt both liberating and uncertain. She missed the familiarity of her work, but not the way it had begun to define her. One afternoon, an unexpected message appeared on her phone. It was from Ethan, brief and unguarded. "I would like to speak with you, if you are willing." No urgency, no demand. Just an invitation. Lena read it twice, her emotions shifting between caution and curiosity. After a long pause, she replied, "One conversation. That was all." They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe overlooking the river, neutral ground far removed from offices and resorts. When Ethan arrived, he stood as she approached, a small gesture that did not go unnoticed. He looked different, not in appearance, but in presence. There was less certainty in the way he held himself, more awareness in his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. Lena nodded, taking a seat across from him. They spoke at first of simple things, the weather, the city, the passage of time. The distance between them lingered, but it was no longer charged with resentment. Eventually, Ethan took a breath, steadying himself. "I have been thinking a great deal," he said, "about the way I treated you, about what I assumed without ever asking." Lena listened without interrupting, her expression attentive but reserved. "I do not expect forgiveness," Ethan continued, "but I needed to tell you that I understand now how my behavior affected you. I mistook my position for entitlement, and I am ashamed of that." The admission was quiet, unadorned, and for the first time, Lena believed it was not strategic. She considered his words carefully before responding. "Understanding is a beginning," she said, "but change is something that happens over time." Ethan nodded. "I know. I am not asking you to return. I only wanted to be honest." The restraint in his voice mattered more than any promise. They sat in silence for a moment, the river flowing steadily beside them. Lena felt the tension ease slightly, replaced by a cautious sense of possibility. As they stood to leave, Ethan said one last thing. "Whatever you choose next, I hope it is because it is what you want, not because you felt limited by me." Lena met his gaze, searching for the familiar pull, then for something new. "Thank you," she said softly. As they parted ways, neither certain of what the future held, one truth remained clear. The story between them had shifted from possession to choice, and in that shift, something fragile but genuine had begun to take shape, leaving both of them standing at the edge of a decision that would define what came next. The ending arrived quietly, the way real change often does, without grand gestures or certainty. Days after their conversation by the river, Lena received an offer she had once thought impossible, a role at a smaller firm that valued flexibility and autonomy, a place where her skills would shape decisions rather than simply support them. She sat with the offer for a long time, weighing excitement against familiarity, freedom against the comfort of what she knew. Across town, Ethan continued to adjust to a life without her constant presence. He delegated more, listened longer, noticed how often he had filled silence with control rather than trust. The absence that once felt like loss began to feel like instruction. One evening, as the city lights reflected across the river, Ethan found himself back at the same cafe, not expecting to see Lena, simply drawn there by habit and memory. To his surprise, she was there, seated near the window, the offer letter folded neatly beside her coffee. Their eyes met, and this time, neither hesitated. He joined her, and for a moment, they sat without speaking, the quiet no longer heavy but thoughtful. "I made a decision today," Lena said finally. Ethan nodded, his expression open. "I accepted the offer," she continued. "I am moving forward." He felt a flicker of disappointment, quickly tempered by respect. "I am glad," he replied honestly. "You deserve that." The sincerity in his voice surprised them both. Lena studied him, noticing the absence of expectation. There was no attempt to persuade, no subtle pull back toward what had been. Just acceptance. "And you?" she asked. "What comes next for you?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I am learning to build something that does not rely on people disappearing into my orbit," he said. "It is slower than I am used to, but it feels necessary." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They spoke for a while longer, sharing thoughts that once would have remained unspoken. When it was time to leave, they stood outside beneath the evening sky, the river moving steadily beside them. Lena hesitated, then smiled softly. "Perhaps our paths will cross again," she said. "Perhaps," Ethan replied. "And if they do, I hope it will. Be as equals." She nodded, the smile lingering as she walked away, not with finality, but with intention. Ethan watched her go, feeling a quiet sense of completion settle in. He had not claimed her, nor had he lost her in the way he once feared. Instead, he had gained something less tangible but far more enduring, an understanding of what it meant to care without possession, to desire without entitlement. In the weeks that followed, both carried the experience with them. Lena stepped into her new role with confidence, grounded by the knowledge that choosing herself had been the right decision. Ethan continued his work with a different rhythm, one that allowed space for others to exist fully beside him. Their story did not end with a dramatic reunion or a definitive promise, but with something more honest. Growth, respect, the quiet realization that love, in its healthiest form, does not cage or claim, but listens and allows. And perhaps that is the lesson worth holding on to. Sometimes, the most meaningful journeys are not about getting what we want, but about learning how to let go with grace and becoming better in the process. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever faced a moment where control gave way to understanding, we invite you to support our channel by liking this video, subscribing for more romantic and emotional stories, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Your support helps us continue bringing stories that linger long after the final words are spoken. Thank you for watching.